So thanks everyone for coming to Show and Tell. Yay! This happens every month. If you ever want to give a talk, please talk to Adam or I. We usually have 2 speakers per month about all kinds of different things. A couple of you have already spoken, so cool. And if you have any questions, there will be time after each talk. So if something's super unclear, of course ask, but generally just hold questions to the end. And thanks for coming. So whenever you want to begin.
All right, cool. So I'm Robert Dwyer. You can call me Rob or Robert, whichever you prefer. I go by both. I've been at Indy Hall for about 2 months now. This is kind of my way of introducing myself. I do data science work, machine learning, and data mining in the healthcare sector for work. But today I'm going to talk about kind of a hobby of mine, which is that I've been reading through biographies of each of the U.S. presidents in chronological order, because I just kind of have an interest in American history. So started obviously with George Washington, and I'm now finishing up Eisenhower, getting ready to start Kennedy. But I'm going to talk today about one of my favorite presidents, who's maybe a little lesser known, which is Teddy Roosevelt. And before I start, I'll say a couple things about sort of the process. I highly recommend it if anyone has like a lot of time they want to devote to reading biographies. It's a great way to learn about U.S. history. Obviously, there's an uninterrupted string of presidents from the beginning of the country up to the present day. They grapple with sort of the major challenges of the day. And you get like a very personal view of history because these people are living it, and their decisions have these huge impacts, and they struggle with them, and that's really interesting to see. But you also get kind of the wide-angle view of what the big issues are. So it just ends up being kind of a fun project. So Teddy Roosevelt, I read a trilogy by Edmund Morris, highly recommend it, really great writer, paints a great picture of the man, and the subject is just fascinating. Teddy was just a very interesting person. So I like him, I guess, foremost, we're talking about him because he was a good president. He was transformative. He was the first modern president, the first true progressive president. He was a Republican. Here's just kind of a list of some of his major accomplishments as president. Revitalizing the Sherman Antitrust Act. He took on some of the biggest corporations of the day, like Standard Oil, and broke them up. He negotiated an end to the coal strike in 1902. This was important because this was the first time the federal government had taken a stance in a labor dispute that wasn't blatantly anti-labor. He brought both factions to his office and kind of made them strike a deal. The response to the Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle, was for people to sort of protest. And one of the results of that was Roosevelt got the Pure Food and Drug Act passed. He worked to build the Panama Canal. This is maybe one of his most lasting legacies because that's obviously had a huge impact on the world economy and on security. And he helped negotiate an end to the Russo-Japanese War. This was a really bloody war between Russia and Japan. And he basically invited the leaders of the two countries to his yacht. And they kind of hung out on his yacht and hammered out a peace accord. And so he won the Nobel Prize for that, for peace, which was maybe one of the more ironic Nobel Peace Prizes given because Teddy is known, and I think his legacy is tarnished by the fact that he was very much like a nationalist, imperialist kind of jingo kind of guy. But the reason I like him is not just because he had these important contributions to policy, but because he was a really interesting person. So Edmund Morris has this, it's a really tortured passage about him where he calls him this geometric whole, planes piling upon planes. And what he really means is that, you know, he's a multifaceted guy. He had all these really interesting personality characteristics. So I'm just going to kind of walk through some of those and share some of the more interesting stories that I discovered reading about him. So account after account describes his personality as being effervescent, radioactive in a positive way. He has an aura. He's magnetic. People who met him were just really immediately taken by him. And this is really important in an era of politics before you even had broadcast radio, right? Politics was very personal. You shook hands, you gave small talks, and he was just had a remarkable personality, even among other politicians. He was indomitable. This is a laundry list of his accomplishments prior to becoming president. it's worth noting he became president upon the assassination of William McKinley. He was vice president at the time. So he was and is still the youngest person to ever be sitting president. Kennedy was elected younger than Roosevelt was elected to his second term, but Roosevelt was the youngest. So basically by 40, he'd held a half dozen major positions in local, state, and national politics. Incredibly successful. He was often compared by the press to a locomotive for just the inevitability of his progress. He was an incredible intellectual, and this is, I think, best typified by his book, The Naval War of 1812. This was his first of 15 books he would write, so he was also a prolific author. But he wrote this without any naval experience, and what's interesting is it became the preeminent work on naval tactics in the War of 1812 for almost a century. He taught at the Naval Academy in Annapolis, and what's even crazier is he wrote it as an undergraduate at Harvard. He just went to the Harvard library, and later he finished it when he was at Columbia, just went to the library and read. And one of the things that was so remarkable about him is he had a photographic memory, and he could speed read like insanely fast. So he read on average a book a day throughout his life, maybe 20,000 books total. So he was able to just read all this and assimilate all this information into this great work. It's like a 19-year-old. He was also athletic. The picture at the top left is of him at Harvard. So while he's writing this book, he's also boxing a lot, and he was the runner-up in the Harvard boxing competition. The picture at the top right is him with what's called his tennis cabinet. Like his best friends, anyone who was okay at tennis, he would have play tennis with him on a court that his wife had installed at the White House. And he would take these guys on these crazy treks around Washington, like hiking, swimming naked in the Potomac in winter, like all these crazy things, to the point where countries like the UK or like England and France actually recalled their elderly ambassadors and sent younger guys out so that they could like take part in these expeditions. And then this is just a great picture of him riding a moose through a river. He was adventurous. This picture top left was him. He owned a cattle ranch out west in the North Dakota, or in the Dakota Badlands. And so he was this really wealthy aristocrat from New York, but then for many years in between political gigs, he would go out and he would just live like a cowboy. This picture here is him on top of a steam shovel. So this is at the Panama Canal during its construction, obviously one of his big legacies. He was the first sitting president to leave the country and travel abroad. And here he left the official tour and just climbed on top of this and started moving dirt. Top right, after his presidency, he took a 6-month-long safari in Africa. It was financed by Andrew Carnegie and sponsored by the Smithsonian Institute. So he shot just thousands of different animals. He's an avid hunter, and then sent most of them back to the Smithsonian where they were stuffed and sort of made up their natural history display. And then bottom right also is an older man in his 50s. He went on this expedition to chart an uncharted tributary of the Amazon River. Almost died like 4 times, caught malaria for like the 3rd time. It was very much like a Heart of Darkness style expedition. One of the guys ended up walking off in the middle of the night and killing himself. It was just really, really a crazy thing for an ex-president to do. He was heroic. This is him. He's probably best known for being leader of the Rough Riders during the Spanish-American War, and this is what really catapulted him to national acclaim. But he also tried really hard to fight in World War I. Wilson wouldn't let him. He didn't want any civilians fighting in the war, but he was heroic, if not a bit bellicose. And he was also, he was kind of crazy. I don't know if you can read this headline, but it says, "Maniac in Milwaukee shoots Colonel Roosevelt. He ignores wound, speaks an hour, goes to hospital." This is during the war, during the campaign of 1912. And yeah, he's going to give a speech. He gets shot in the chest and he's bleeding, and he refuses to go to the hospital, and he gives an hour-long speech. You can see here the bullet went actually through a copy of his speech and into him. And he almost passed out. He's in the hospital for quite a while afterwards, but he's just that kind of he was a tough guy, a man's man. So I like this picture to kind of summarize him. The square deal was his sort of catchphrase for his progressive politics. He thought the government owed every person a square deal. And he fought hard, even though he was an aristocrat, to protect people from special interests in large corporations. He was also an avid conservationist. He thought part of the Square Deal was preventing the despoilment of nature, and so he set a ton of like 200 million acres aside for parks and whatnot, protected by the government. But then, of course, this is also a picture of a boxing ring, which kind of typifies the duality of Roosevelt as this progressive intellectual and also this kind of manly boxing adventurer.
Cool. Would you unshare your screen so you can see if anybody on our thing has questions?
Sure.
Ooh. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yep.
So Roosevelt is one of your favorites,
Uh-huh.
and I wonder if there is apart from that icon of his hat, the Square Deal, and the boxing ring as his legacy, is there a legacy that you can see in presidents that we've had recently, where we are now? Like, did he bring a change to the way that people behave?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, he really expanded the power of the federal government to regulate business. And that was something both Wilson and FDR are kind of, I think, better known as progressive presidents because they got more legislation passed. But I think he really was the first to show that you could have the government regulate the private sector in order to try and protect people. So I think that was probably, I mean, really that whole notion of federal regulation, I think he was the first president to really take that to a new level.
So all the presidents you've gone through, who so far is your least favorite president?
Johnson, followed Lincoln, yeah. He was the only Southern senator to remain with the Union after the Civil War, and Lincoln picked him as his vice president when he ran the second time to sort of try to start the rebuilding process. But when he died, I mean, he was very much like a racist Southerner, like the rest of the people who succeeded. And so a lot of Lincoln's racially progressive measures were repealed or attempted to be repealed through Johnson. But actually, Congress was so staunchly Republican, they were able to override almost all his vetoes and stuff. So in practice, he didn't do much. But basically, all he tried to do was to set race relations back. Yeah. He was a jerk.
So if you're speaking about presidents, they cannot be presidents for very long.
Right.
Do you find that there's particular like big characters who are a level or two down that keep showing up book after book?
Oh, good question. Yes, it's interesting. The importance of the presidency actually waxes and wanes a lot. So if you look at like the Gilded Age, late 1800s, it's the industrialists, Carnegie, Rockefeller, these guys that really are sort of constants throughout and have a whole lot of power. And I would actually say that's one period in history where reading the presidents isn't a great way to see what's going on in the country because the president had very little power during that time, and a lot of what was going on in the world was going on in the private sector, and you just don't see a ton of that. But yeah, the industrialists then, obviously people like Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton in the earlier days. There were a number of Secretary of States that were, served across multiple presidents and had a big impact.
Any other questions?
I have a question. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'd like to know what inspired your reading project. It's very cool.
Good question. I don't actually really remember why I started it. I know I went to UVA and someone got me a biography of Thomas Jefferson at some point, which I read and liked, and I kind of thought, well, maybe I'd read more. But I can't really say how I started it, to be honest. I don't remember. It was just something that, I'd read a few presidents here and there and just kind of decided I might as well read them all.
Go back to the beginning. Oh.
There's one over here.
I was just wondering if you have a list of books you read, if you would share them, like you go down.
Oh, sure. I've actually been working off, the Washington Post has a really good article that has all the presidents listed in their best biographies. So I've gone roughly by that, and they kind of rank them in order. The only difference is there are a couple series that have like short 150-page biographies of every president, and they tend to recommend those. And I would recommend not unless it's a president that really didn't do anything. But usually the longer ones are actually more interesting because they paint more of a picture that's engaging, whereas some of the times the shorter ones just feel like a bulleted list of like people and things you don't know or care about.
you have any interest in like writing your own book, like a meta biography? And I think you mentioned you're in data science.
Uh-huh.
So I wonder if you find patterns in all of this.
It's an interesting idea. I mean, I'm not a historian at all. I just kind of like to read. I have, put a little bit of thought into some of the big themes that have come up that I haven't seen much about. So I've sort of thought about that a little bit, but not seriously. Maybe I'll think more seriously about it now. Now that I have corroboration, it might be a good idea.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yay! All right. Kat, you are up next.
All right.
So I'm going to hide our view so we can just see you. Maybe. Awesome. Great.
All set?
Yes, whenever you're ready.
So I'm Kat Johnson. I'm piping in from Santa Cruz, California. I've been friends with Alex for years, although we've never met in person, but we've worked on a lot of co-working projects. There are a handful of things. I've interviewed him, and we run in a shared circle. So anyway, thanks to Sam and Alex and Indy Hall. It's nice to see you guys in your new space. Is it as awesome as it seems from here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all right.
So I'm a writer and a content strategist, and I write a lot about co-working, community, collaboration, future of work, things like that, things that frankly I'm passionate about and interested in, and I count myself really fortunate to be able to do work that is so meaningful to me. I'm a regular contributor to shareable.net, if you guys have seen that. I've written for a bunch of other things. Let's see, I'm a musician. I am a kind of wannabe yogi. I'm a big celebrator and advocate for diversity, and that's where I try to keep my writing within the realm of things that I'm passionate about and interested in. Let's see. So what I want to talk with you guys about is I want to encourage you to start thinking about content as a way to promote your projects, whether they're community projects or little side projects you're doing or something. You probably heard the phrase content marketing. It's a bit of a buzzword right now. What it really is storytelling about your particular thing and bringing the humanness out of your project, connecting with people who are kind of your ideal people or who you think you want to reach. Content is a great way to get the stories of your community out there in front of people. And community projects and side projects are usually really passion driven. So there are already great stories within there just waiting to be told. So it takes a little bit of strategy to kind of tap into those stories and find the humanness that people are going to connect with. But once you can do that, it's a really powerful way, and it's super low cost, right? It just takes some strategy. You can't compete with big budgets, but you can totally compete on a content level if you do some strategy. Some of the things you want to think about if you're considering doing content, like let's use a blog post for an example, because that's my thing, but you could apply this to video or live or whatever your thing is. Know going into your piece of content who you're trying to reach with it. A lot of times people make the mistake of trying to reach everyone or having kind of a loosely defined audience group. And if you try to write for everybody, you end up writing for no one. So know who you're writing for, and it's helpful sometimes to narrow it down to, if you have one person in mind, like people call it an avatar or a customer persona or something, but think of the one person who's like your ideal. Like I watched the Indy Hall show and tell from last month, and someone was talking about their metal project, metal music. So in your mind, be thinking like, who is this person? Like, where are they hanging out online? What are their interests? What are their challenges? What would they like to know more about? Get a really clear sense of who it is you're trying to reach. And that doesn't mean you only reach that person, but it means that the content is much richer and deeper and has a lot more, it's more textured than just like some blanket content that tries to reach everyone. And then once you have an idea about that, think about the keywords you want to be found for. And this is where content gets super powerful. Like if you're, I'm going to stick with I spent 20 years working in a record store, so I'm going to stick with the metal analogy that was used last month. But if you are trying to be found for a phrase like doom metal, there's way too much competition, right? You're not going to be found from people searching. You may get a little bit of traffic from your initial social shares and like that, but if you want to do anything longer term than that, you have to niche down quite a bit. So instead of that, think about like best doom metal bands in Philly for 2017. That way, if somebody Googles doom metal in Philly, that post with that headline stands a really good chance of being among the top few posts, if not depending on what the competition is. But so you want to use your keywords in your headline, use them throughout, organically throughout your piece, but mention in the intro, like best doom metal bands in Philly, do a breakdown. So you guys get where I'm going with this? Like instead of trying to go big with your content, really niche it down to something that you actually have a chance of being found for. That way, when you publish, so you publish this week and you get a little social traction and people see it a little bit, but then it dies if it's just, doom metal. But if you frame it in a way where people are going to find it, you can get traffic and interest from that post indefinitely, right? Like there are posts I've written for Shareable. There's this one called How to Live Off the Grid in a Tiny House. I wrote it like 4 years ago, and it's gotten hundreds of thousands of views. But most interestingly, it gets thousands per week because of that keyword phrase. You just know when people type in live off the grid in a tiny house or tiny house off the grid or things like that, that post is one of the top ones. And then within that, there are a lot of, like how to, a lot of resources and things like that. So if you start thinking in that way, it becomes, rather than your blog being like something you think you should do or something to kind of chronicle what's happening, it becomes this really powerful content engine to drive people in, market your thing, whatever your project or whatever you're working on, and get a little bit of long-term energy going with it too. So the trick with this is getting ahead of your posts, right? Like you don't want to just throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. Like say you have an event, like you see a lot of blog posts that are like roundup or recap of our event, of last week's event. And that doesn't really keep to anyone for too long or anything. So you want to get, like going into, if you know you have an event coming up, you can schedule out some posts, like maybe do a Q&A with one of the people who's involved with it, somebody who has a little bit of social influence, do a Q&A with them, a week or two out or something. Have them share it with their social circles. Make sure you have their name in the headline and as part of the keywords in there. Then you can also do, if there are multiple people involved, you could do roundups, which is a really powerful way to get more traffic and more eyes on your content by including other people. And then if they all share it, like if you do a roundup of 5 or 7 people and ask them for a quote or two, and then they all share it with their circles, and it kind of goes like that. It becomes this really powerful way. So start thinking about how you can leverage kind of industry influencers or social influencers and people who are involved with the project. And think of things in the evergreen, like evergreen posts. If you aren't familiar with that term, it just means they stay relevant down the road. So instead of like the recap of last week's event, you could do something like starting an indie record label in Philly, takeaway from Indie Hall's fall event, or something like that. So if that's the focus of the thing, if that's the focus of the event, like somebody's sharing tips on doing that, get that right up there. So when people are Googling, indie label in Philly, you're going to be in that mix. Even though it was just an event, it could have easily been lost as just an event recap that didn't go anywhere, right? Let's see. you hear this, content marketing is kind of a buzzy term, but you can go down the wormhole with all kinds of data and analytics, things like that. But at the very essence, it's just telling the story of your space and doing it, or your project, and doing it strategically, so that you get as much kind of momentum and traffic and people. You can reach your people by strategizing going into it. Target people. So I want to share real quick one project I'm working on that's just in the seed stage, and maybe when it gets some more traction, I can come back and share it with you guys. But well, thanks, Em. I'm part of a team, a small team right now, but we're partnering with the Santa Cruz Public Library system to put a co-working environment in one of the branches, which is something I'm super excited about. I'm very passionate about co-working, and it's been really transformative in my life, and it's hard to overstate. I could go on and on, but I'm really looking forward to partnering with the library to make it more accessible to people and get a little more diversity in there. And anyway, so I'd love to come back sometime maybe and talk with that. But do you guys have any questions about content, or how can I help you? Do you need tips?
I have an overarching question about I'll come a little closer to the microphone.
Yeah, thanks.
About you've been, so within the topic of like co-working and communities, you have the benefit of covering a topic for a longer period of time, written about co-working communities that you're interested.
Will you say that again? It was glitching out a little bit.
Sure. You've been writing about co-working communities for a while.
Yes.
I'm curious if any trends that have popped up over time that you're diving deeper in now, things that have changed over time, things that were popular before or less popular now, or the other way around, if that question makes sense?
I think so. That is a big arching question. I would say, and Alex can talk about this all day, but the early co-working days were very community focused. Did I freeze, or did you guys freeze? Oops. Are you there? Oh, there we are.
There we go.
Hi, guys.
Is it recording?
Yes, recording is still going.
So just really quick, I would say a huge shift that's happening is co-working has gone from the early days where it was really community focused, a very small handful of people, a small number of spaces. And it's now, as you have seen, I'm sure, just an insanely booming industry with thousands and thousands of spaces all over the place. And a lot are coming in, a lot of like desk rental places and things like that don't necessarily have community at their heart. I mean, it's tricky because people are kind of trying to sell community as a commodity, right? So I think that's been one thing, that it's gone from a very organic grassroots movement into this huge industry. So along that like projection, a lot has happened. That being said, there's still spaces that are big and really well funded and all that are trying to stay focused on community, I think, to different, varying degrees of success. But I think that's a huge thing that's happening in the industry. And I'm trying to come to peace with this, because there are people who they're not concerned about coming in and having, they wouldn't go to the show and tell, or they don't necessarily go to the happy hours. They just want to go in and do their work thing and make some sales calls and then go home. So, and that's fine. So things like desk rentals and stuff work well for them. So there's something for everybody in this thing.
How does these changes influence your writing?
Oh, that's a tough one. Well, I do my very best to write about kind of organic co-working, really community focused. I'm not interested in the corporate co-working model, for lack of a better term. So I try to stay focused. I think more than anything, it's inspired me to kind of find my values around it, around the movement, and see where I fit in with that, and see how I can promote spaces and projects and individuals that are really committed to what we know is the most powerful thing about co-working, which is like these amazing connections that we're making, and having this community just get stronger and richer.
So it's really, you've gone from being, you're just focusing more on signal boosting instead of just following the trend.
Well, I think that the problem, one of the challenges we face is that people who are new to co-working don't understand that they see WeWork as co-working, and not to call out WeWork, but we will. Whereas a little community space may not be found, right? It's like if it's a space with like 50 members that is not in the heart of town or something, that people don't understand that there are options, that it's not just a giant space, that you could actually, if it's more your pace to be a part of a space where you're just going to be around 10 or 20 people, or if it's more your pace, like there are co-working spaces that aren't revenue driven at all. The people, it's just a handful of people who all pitch in and make the rent each month, and that's their only concern. You know, they're not driven by a revenue model. They're just making sure that they keep their space open. So, you know, not saying that's the best way or anything, but I think it's important that people know that co-working is a lot more than like, now there are co-working spaces in Staples or the latest like $16 billion valuation or things like that.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions? Okay. Thank you so much.
All right. Yeah, thanks guys.
How do I do
right.
this? Do I start the video or do I not?
Yeah, you can start it. So,
Can you not have it up
yes.
there?
That should do it.
Oops. All right, hi guys. I'm Nathan.
Do you want to turn off the mic on yours?
Yeah, how do I do that? There we go.
How's that sound now?
Oh, awesome.
Pretty normal.
Sweet. All right. So I'm Nathan. 5 years ago, I was trying to climb the corporate ladder at Johnson & Johnson. I went on a vacation to Hawaii and immediately came back and quit my job. 4 years ago, I joined Indy Hall. That's not me, but it kind of looks like me. 3 years ago, I launched something called PromoFly, which was a Chrome extension and iPhone app that helps you save money. A year ago, I shut that down because it wasn't making money. 3 months ago, I became a dad.
Oh.
So this is Ava Brand. So this is secretly just a presentation showing photos.
Yay!
I've received a lot of requests for photos, so this is satisfying that request. But no, I actually wanted to talk about something that has been in the works for a little while, but really came to fruition about 3 weeks ago. And it's the story of how something I was doing just for fun accidentally started making a lot of money. So I'm into photography. I would consider myself an amateur photographer. And at the beginning of the year, I really wanted to start honing in on my photography skills. And there's been a lot of talk about this company called Visco, and they make film emulations for Lightroom. And these things are very popular, and people pay a lot of money for these film emulations. And so I got some of these film emulations, and the first question I had is, what the fuck are all these films, right? So for someone who's only done digital photography like myself, it's great that I'm getting all these different films like Agfa Optima 102, but what does that actually do, and why do I want to use that, and how is that different from any of the other things on there? And I looked online and I couldn't really find anything. And so I started keeping an Evernote. I started just researching on my own for my own purposes, and pretty soon I had this whole catalog of what all these films were. And at some point it hit me like, hey, I actually know a little bit about these now. And so I started actually writing about it and making posts about it. So I'll just show you, whoops. So I basically started writing really long posts and very, very in-depth posts about each of the different VSCO film packs. And for every single film, I would have lots of information on it. I'd have multiple before and afters so that you can kind of see like exactly what's happening. And I would describe it in a way that previous people had not. No one had been doing this. And at the time, I was pretty involved on Reddit in the photography subreddit. And so as I would come out with a new post, I would start to post it on this subreddit. And it started to actually get pretty popular to the point where when you search for a lot of the VSCO film packs, my guides are coming up right after VSCO themselves. So at this point, I was still really doing this just for fun. In fact, I hadn't even told my wife I was doing this because I was worried she'd think it was just a waste of time. I was only doing this at night. I was still doing marketing consulting and stuff during the day. And at some point, it started to get more and more traffic, and people started asking me questions that weren't directly related to VSCO. Just asking about, how do I achieve this certain look in Lightroom? What am I doing wrong with my own editing? How should I be editing this? Which film pack should I buy? They started asking me all these different questions. And so I started thinking, let me try to answer some of these questions and figure out, how do you actually do this? And so that started me on a whole kind of separate quest, to find inside of Lightroom, what are the things, what are the panels in here that are actually making a difference and contributing to great photos, and what are the panels in here that we're using but aren't really making that big of a difference? And I basically started to learn that the camera calibration profile was hugely important. It's something that you can fine tune in ways that you can't with other things. And the other thing that's hugely important is the tone curve panel, which is very difficult to do inside of Lightroom, but it has tremendous opportunities to do all kinds of effects. So then I started developing, well, how do I actually create my own sets of presets? And I launched this, the 10 free Lightroom presets, and put it out there, and became one of the biggest posts on the Reddit photography section. And I now get over 300 people a day signing up, giving their email, and downloading this. So over time, I started to get more and more and more people, and I was talking to Alex about all this, and he was giving unbelievable feedback along the way. And like, okay, how do I turn this expertise into a community? And one suggestion he had that was awesome is everybody who downloads this, they get into this funnel inside of something called Drip. And basically, after a certain amount of time, it sends them a personal note from me asking them what they think of it, and would it be okay if I follow them on Instagram? And the responses I get from that, I mean, I've gotten 2 people just from when this luncheon hour started. I mean, I get over 50 people responding to me every day saying, yes, I would love if you followed me on Instagram. Here's what I think about the packs. When are you coming out with more? And so over time, the audience grew and grew and grew. And now I have about 42,000 people who are subscribed to my list. And so 3 weeks ago, I launched my first major paid pack. So let me show you. Which is the eChrome collection. So you can see some before and afters of some of the effects that different presets achieve. And I can show you in Lightroom, if I just come here and apply this kind of instantly, you can see in the tone curves, very precise tone curves. And actually, I have those developed. I actually do a lot of the work inside of Microsoft Excel and have all different kinds of calculations to get the precise points. I'm using a custom camera profile, which is the NateCam camera profile. And that actually, there's even a whole nother world to learn about when you start talking about camera profiles and understanding like the color matrix or the forward matrix or the HuSat delta tables. There's this incredibly complex technical world to go from you know, this to that with a click. And I can even come in and kind of edit it further. I can add some more fade if I want. I can add some punch. Yeah, and so I launched that 3 weeks ago, and the response has been awesome. I mean, it's amazing to actually do something that you find fun and interesting, to have people pay you for it, and then to have people thank you for paying you for that. So yeah, so now actually I'm doing, like, actually handing off some of my clients that I've been doing marketing and WordPress development for, and focusing more on this full time, because this made more in a week than I had in the previous 3 months of marketing consulting. So, so yeah, so that's it. That's the story. If anybody has questions about like Lightroom or my process or business stuff or Instagram, you know, I'm around, and I'd love to, or wants to see more pictures of Ava, any of those things, I'm around. So yeah, thanks.
Questions?
How much of the preset is an objective thing, like I'm objectively making this photo better for these technical reasons, and how much of it is just that you have like kind of an artist's eye that other people appreciate and they just like your filters?
No, it's definitely a combination of both. I mean, you can, like, I can look at some things and say, okay, objectively these skin tones look awful, because I want skin tones that look consistent, soft, and these skin tones have like a lot of greenish or magenta tints to them. So there is some objectivity to that, but it also a lot is like, okay, well, which look do you actually want to achieve here? And I actually have a post about this, how like when you're editing a photo, if you don't already have in your head what you want the photo to look like in the end, then there's no way you're going to get it there, because there's a bazillion different paths you could go down, and you're never going to know if you're finished or if you like it until you actually know what it is you're trying to achieve.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about your trajectory for content, given that there are so many people who have made a career out of learning how to use tools, learning how to be a better photographer just behind the camera before you even get to the software. And you noticed that there was a disparity in that people weren't making it easy. People weren't packaging some of those tutorials in a way that's digestible, accessible. So what I'm curious of is, how do you make sure that you don't give all the best secrets away immediately, and then now you don't have any content or tips to give?
I mean, I'm planning on asking Alex that person. I don't know. I mean, I think that the nice thing about a niche like photography is that, let me just give you an example. Visco has 7 different packs. They're not even that different from each other, but a lot of photographers have bought all 7 packs. Because if you're trying to get a different look and you're charging a couple grand for a wedding every weekend, it's not a big deal to lay down $100 to maybe get a look that will set you apart from other photographers.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I think that I think that there's a lot of potential for more education, for showing people some of the stuff, how to do the tone curves and how to do the camera calibrations. I think there's a lot of potential.
Yeah. Yeah. And I imagine that you can look at what Visco has put out and effectively do your job as being a translator based on the things that they already.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll still do more. I'll probably do still some more guides to stuff that like already exists, just as kind of a. I don't really make money off of that, but it helps establish like my expertise in the area. But, yeah.
Any other questions?
Actually, I do. So you have 40,000 plus users, and some of them are purchasing from you. And you're calling them subscriptions. Are you thinking about like maybe making a gated community where there's a monthly fee or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I want to find more ways to do community. I don't know about charging for the community versus charging for some of the tools. There's another company, it's called Looks Like Film or something like that, and they have a massive private Facebook group, and that's their primary marketing on. Is they have like 1 million people in this Facebook group just sharing their photos to try to get more people to follow them on Instagram. But as they're doing that, they're also marketing to these people their own filter packs. So I don't know. I mean, like, I don't know what I would offer that I would charge for in like a recurring basis. Yeah.
So here's another silly question, because I don't know, and I'm not on Instagram. So what's the value of Instagram, having people follow you and vice versa?
Yeah, I think it's a couple things. I mean, I think it's a credibility indicator. So when people go to my blog and then they go to my Instagram and they see that I have 3,500 followers now, like, okay, like this guy is maybe a more legitimate photographer than if he had 50 people in his Instagram. It's also a place where I'll post examples of using my filter packs, and other people will chime in and say, oh my God, that looks awesome, I want this. Right. And then other people will chime in and say, oh, I bought this and it's amazing, you should definitely get it. I don't know, I think that there's also a value just to me interacting with people. So it's not just I'm this faceless person making presets. I'm like following them too on Instagram and liking their photos, and they're building a connection that way. Yeah.
I'm not personally familiar with Visco and this Lightroom. You primarily use this? Is it mostly like professional photographers who are purchasing your packs?
Yeah, it's professional photographers, amateur photographers who want to be professional. It's companies that want to make their newsletters look better. It's all different kinds of people, but yeah, it's primarily professional photographers. Yeah.
Is it an Adobe product?
Lightroom is an Adobe product. It's like Photoshop. These also work, by the way, in Photoshop or they work now in like a Premiere. If you wanted to apply these to video, you could apply this to video with something else. And it's called a 3D LUT file.
I was photographing on films actually, like years ago, and I stopped in the stage and switched to digital because it seemed to me like a great challenge, a lot of learning to learn what you need to process. With all these filters that you apply, does it minimize in a way the amount of processing that you do? I mean, like basically I take the raw image and pass it through these filters, and if I know that I like Fuji Velvia, for example, I just choose the Fuji Velvia and I work with it.
That's right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It can save you a tremendous amount of time. And also, like some of the stuff you aren't able to do in Lightroom unless you have some of the technical chops that you wouldn't be expected to have.
Sorry for the situation, but Lightroom, that's something that works separated from the Photoshop.
Yeah, Lightroom is Photoshop is more like if I'm editing an individual photo, I will use Photoshop. If I'm editing a batch of photos, like I've taken 100 photos on my camera and I want to edit them all at once, you do that in Lightroom. Yeah.
So this is for also for an amateur that doesn't want to go to Lightroom and Photoshop and just the equivalent of me going and buying a Velvia and just screening it from Velvia. I mean, I just take my photos and pass them through these filters, and that's basically it.
Yeah, I mean, you could do that. I mean, most people end up tweaking it additionally beyond the first pass of the filter, but you do have to have either Lightroom or Photoshop in order to use these. Like this, it's not a standalone thing.
It's not me going through this for like their app.
Yeah, no, it's not going through any kind of Lightroom. It has to happen on a desktop.
Thank you for talking to us.
Yeah.
When are you going to do a tutorial on Instagram filters? I want to use Lo-Fi real good.
Yeah.